There are some really good magicians out there. They make rabbits disappear and reappear from a hat. They saw beautiful women in half and magically put them back together. But only the best magicians can disappear themselves. Today, a vanishing act that sparked wild theories from alien abductions to government cover-ups, all within the eerie backdrop of the Michigan Triangle. Welcome to Capers and Cocktails, a true crime podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously and gives you something to enjoy while you listen. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you're enjoying one of our themed cocktails, ensure you're of legal drinking age and have fun, but drink responsibly. Stephen Kubacki was born in 1954 and grew up in South Deerfield, Massachusetts, in a hardworking lower-middle-class family. His father worked in a tire factory, while his mother kept things running smoothly as a secretary at the University of Massachusetts. The family lived near the Berkshire Mountains, and as a result, Steve grew up as an avid skier. He started skiing seriously when he was 17 and had skied and hiked some of the taller mountains in Europe. Steve's teenage years were marked by a rebellious streak. He attended Deerfield Academy as a day student, graduating in 1972. Instead of hitting the books, you'd often find him in the school's library, skipping classes. After high school graduation, slim, muscular Steve enrolled as an undergrad at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. Hope College is a small, private liberal arts college, about 45 minutes southwest of Grand Rapids. His professors described him as a good student with a restless mind that led him to try several different fields of study. Larry Penrose, Steve's informal advisor, said Steve was brilliant and was, quote, so good that the grades are not the measure, end quote. He said Steve was deep and complex and somewhat moody in the pursuit of his studies. He would say Steve, quote, made his own choices. He did very good work when he chose to, and when he chose not to, he didn't, end quote. Steve spent his junior year in Germany. He didn't go back to school for 1.5 years after returning from that country and re-registered at the college in the second semester of the 1976-77 term. Steve lived off campus during his senior year, and during the winter of 1978, he was finishing up his final semester. He had a job offer at a newspaper after graduation. His dad was going to give him the family home, and he had a girlfriend in Germany, or a fling, I guess. One weekend in February, he decided to take a solo cross-country ski trip across Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan has never fully frozen over, but evidently during the 1978 to 79 winter, it was 90% or more ice covered. That's only happened 5 winters in recorded history, and at the time, it was only the 3rd time it had gotten that close to fully frozen. So it makes sense that Steve wanted to take advantage of what might have been his last chance to ski across the Great Lake. On Saturday, February 18, 1978, Steve packed up gear to last him just a couple of days and headed out. And then he did not come home. His roommate wasn't too concerned when Steve didn't return on Saturday night, but by Sunday morning, he was worried. When Steve was reported missing, the police, as is totally shocking, essentially said that Steve had a right to go missing, and no one went to look for him. The next morning, Monday, a couple of men on snowmobiles came across Steve's skis, poles, and a backpack. When rescue teams arrived in the area, they found only one other clue, set of clues, a 200-yard trail of footprints in the snow that led from his gear towards the edge of the lake. And then those prints just stopped, like that. It was as if he was plucked out of thin air or walked into a now invisible door off of the face of the earth. His family flew in immediately from Massachusetts. Lake Michigan is the 2nd largest Great Lake and the 5th largest lake in the world. It is over 22,000 square miles. It's absolutely massive. It truly looks like an ocean if you're standing on one of its shores. A search area of 3 miles was defined, and hundreds of people organized to search by land, mainly by snowmobile, combing the frozen lake alongside people with search dogs. They also had helicopters and an airplane searching by air. Steve's father was heavily involved in the search, both in the air and on the ground. Even though the search had been called on, it was assumed that Steve must have fallen into the lake and drowned. Yeah, the frozen lake. the frozen lake with no cracks or holes or signs that anyone could fall through anything. Now, I will say that it's not that simple. Remember, this lake isn't fully frozen, and there are these weather conditions on Lake Michigan in particular that move the water underneath the ice, which could have broken the ice and then it could have refrozen over in the 2 days that police officers were not doing their jobs. Rescue divers broke through the ice and searched water in the area, but found no clothing, gear, and did not find Steve either. The locals were not surprised. Steve must have fallen victim to the Michigan Triangle. Yes, my friends, we are not in the Bermuda Triangle anymore. The Lake Michigan Triangle is a mysterious area within Lake Michigan, bordered by Ludington, Manitowoc, and Benton Harbor, known for unexplained disappearances, shipwrecks, and plane crashes. The first major incident was the disappearance of the French sailing ship Le Griffin in the 17th century, followed by a series of similar events, including the sinking of the Thomas Hume in 1891. The Thomas Hume was discovered fully intact under 150 feet at the bottom of the lake in 2006. And though people had speculated it had sunk after a crash, the ship was perfectly preserved and showed no signs of damage anywhere that would have caused it to sink. The Rouse Simmons, a two-masted schooner, faced a mysterious fate, capsizing twice with its two-man crew vanishing both times. The first incident occurred in 1875 when a ferry came across the overturned vessel. Restored to service, the schooner faced another ill-fated voyage in 1921. Loaded with lumber, Captain Ed Johnson refused to board, saying he had a bad feeling the disaster was coming. Despite efforts by the crew to persuade him, he wisely stayed home. Days later, the ship was found capsized again, its crew missing. Notably, the stern was destroyed as if it had been struck, yet no collisions were reported. After towing the Rouse Simmons to shore, the Coast Guard concluded that there had been no collision, leaving the mystery of the missing stern unresolved forever. The area has been linked to UFO sightings, including the first reported UFO sighting in 1913, and also USO sightings are often reported. USO, you ask? A USO, or unidentified submerged object, refers to an object or phenomenon that is observed underwater and cannot be readily identified or explained. Much like unidentified flying objects are to the sky, USOs are mysterious objects that are seen in bodies of water, including oceans, seas, and lakes. These sightings often involve objects that move in ways that defy current understanding of underwater navigation or technology, leading to speculation and various theories about their origins. The concept of the Michigan Triangle was popularized by Jay Gorley's 1977 book, The Great Lakes Triangle, which noted the frequency of accidents within the Great Lakes. However, the Lake Michigan Shipwreck Research Association dismisses the triangle as a myth, attributing the shipwrecks to the high traffic and natural conditions of the lake. Various natural explanations have been proposed for the disappearances, including dangerous currents and magnetic anomalies that could confuse navigational equipment. Paranormal explanations involve theories about negative energy vortexes and ley lines, and some attribute the occurrences to a prehistoric structure under Lake Michigan known as the North American Stonehenge. Or it could be aliens. Other notable incidents within the triangle include the vanishing of Captain George R. Donner from his locked cabin on the O.M. McFarland. Additionally, the unexplained crash of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 in 1950, and the disappearance of Stephen Kubacki in the winter of 1978. By February 23rd, 5 days after his disappearance, the formal search ended because there was nothing to go on. His family never had him declared legally dead and never published an obituary for him, but for all intents and purposes, he was considered passed away. Hope College gave him an honorary degree. Days continued. Life moves on. But while this may have been another strange case to add to the list of the Michigan Triangle, this is not the end of our episode, friends. But before the other shoe drops, let's drink. Now, while today is not National Hot Buttered Rum Day, that's January 17th if you're wondering, it is our Hot Buttered Rum Day. Hot buttered rum is part of the very fabric of America. It dates back to American colonial times. In the 1650s, Jamaica began exporting molasses to colonial America. Colonists started mixing distilled rum into hot drinks like toddies and nogs. This led to the establishment of distilleries in New England, where colonists created hot buttered rum, eggnog, and other similar beverages. I'll be honest, I'm not sure that I ever made a hot buttered rum before this episode, but I'll be making more of it here, at least in the 5 days a year in Texas that it actually gets cold. To make the cocktail version, muddle 2 teaspoons of packed brown sugar, 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 splash of vanilla, a pinch of cinnamon, a pinch of nutmeg, a dash of allspice in the bottom of a mug. Yes, pinch and dash, they actually are actual baking terms. Pour in 2 parts dark rum and top with 4 parts hot water and stir. You can also garnish with a cinnamon stick if you are fancy and cozy. For the mocktail version, the only difference is that you're going to replace your 2 parts rum with 2 parts rum syrup, but you're definitely not going to skip that cinnamon stick. Sip up and try not to disappear. On May 5th, 1979, a man walked into Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and picked up a newspaper, spotting the date. Bewildered and surprised, he walked to a house he knew in town that was 700 miles almost directly east from a Lake Michigan spot where a man had disappeared. 15 months after the disappearance of Stephen Kubacki, he stood on his aunt's porch. Steve had woken up in a meadow 40 miles away from his childhood home, wearing someone else's clothes and next to a small backpack containing maps and memorabilia that didn't belong to him. There were some maps from California, a Wisconsin Marathon t-shirt, and some running shoes. He also had some handwritten hitchhiking signs that showed he had at least tried to hitchhike to Utah, Reno, and other western cities. Weirdly, he also had a new pair of glasses that somehow were prescribed for him, and he was able to buy them. And Steve remembered, at least according to him, then, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing about what had happened, where he'd been, or who he was for the previous 15 months. He would say, quote, "I was confused by all the hugging and kissing. I didn't feel like I had been gone that long," end quote. The last thing he remembered was, quote, "darkness, cold, and the fear of being lost out on the lake," end quote. And despite the public pressure, no matter what newspaper or news station asked him the questions about what had happened, he could not or would not answer. He has later said that he didn't want to be defined by this experience, and that's why he wouldn't talk to the press. That definitely makes sense, at least to me. So since he couldn't or wouldn't answer, we're going to ask, what happened to Steve? Of course, after his reappearance and his choosing to remain silent about what happened, there was a lot of speculation. The natural conclusion is aliens, a UFO abduction, and return. Others have speculated that he was captured by a secret government program. Both of those would naturally have experiments involved. Another theory is that he found a dimensional or time portal and traveled through the multiverse for a few months. Do you all remember Occam's razor? If you don't, Occam's razor is a philosophical principle that suggests the simplest explanation is often the best one. It says that when faced with competing hypotheses or explanations for an event, the one that makes the fewest assumptions should be selected. The simplest solution is usually correct. So if we apply Occam's razor here, I think maybe, just maybe, he wanted to disappear for a while. Things returned to normal, and the press moved on to more, actual stories. In 1979, Steve earned his BA in German Studies from Hope College. The major was more of a happenstance. He had switched majors about a dozen times before landing on German Studies, simply because he had enough credits. Maybe he was also a little distracted from his trips through another dimension. Sorry. In 1983, Steve earned a master's degree in linguistics and TOEFL from Ohio University. He enrolled in a PhD program in clinical psychology at the University of New Mexico and was eventually awarded a Fulbright Fellowship, which took him to Frankfurt University in Germany. His professional career has been primarily as a college professor. According to his website, he now has a full-time clinical practice. And speaking of his website, Steve is now ready to talk. He says he knows exactly what happened to him during those 15 months. And he's approaching publishers. I'll read his own words now about what he has to say. Quote, after almost 45 years of silence, Stephen Kubacki is ready to reveal where he went after he disappeared. His experience is much stranger and also much more believable than anyone suspects. The story involves a revolutionary organization, an idealistic terrorist in training named Nathan T. Stanfield, spiritual experiences with hallucinogenic drugs and alternate realities, the French Foreign Legion, and a young man's struggle to find meaning during a turbulent time, end quote. If you want to know more, you're going to have to find a publisher for Steve because he's not giving any more away. Does anyone know a publisher? Please email your publisher friend. Thanks for hanging out with me. One of my absolute worst fears is losing my memory. It just gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking about it. This should have been a spooktacular episode. Sheesh. I hope that Steve has gotten all the healing he needs and he is living his very best life now with all of his memories back and maybe some of the ones from his time away. Seems like he does. Just gotta pay him. What a trip. Speaking of trips, why don't you take a trip over to my Twitter? That was bad. Sorry. Anyway, follow me on social media, please. We have a skipped upload next week, but we will be back the week of Thanksgiving to give you an episode to listen to as you travel, if you're traveling. I'll see you then, and remember, there are always... Never mind. Just be careful with your memory.